This brings us to decision science, what I like to think as the formalization of the science behind making good or bad decisions. As for any subject, it's always pretty important to understand the work that has been put and the thinking that is already prevalent. When we think about the qualitative taxonomy of decisions, there's been many attempts already in the past or currently in the present to try to understand what are the fundamental attributes of decisions. How can you categorize decisions? If you can categorize decisions, you can think easier in terms of what is the fundamental attributes that makes a decision good or bad. So in that sense, there is already many frameworks that exist and that attempt to precisely capture these different attributes. You have the one-way, two-way door policy that was applied quite a lot at Amazon, and which therefore became kind of like the de facto framework attributed to the way that Jeff Bezos was making decisions. You have the Eisenhower matrix, you have the Seinfeld framework, the RACI matrix, and the multi-arm bandit, which I personally like a lot because it's kind of like a framework that's used in applied machine learning, and that's very useful to think about how to train artificial intelligence agents. But essentially, all of these frameworks are what I call involvement frameworks. This is quite different from other frameworks, such as the SWOT analysis, the OODA loop, the six thinking hats. These are other frameworks that are mostly focused, mostly concerned with improvement. How do you get into an improvement cycle of the decisions that you make? What are the factors that you think about? How do you approach the decision making to figure out like whether you're starting to make better or worse decision over time? All of these frameworks are pretty important to understand, but in the interest of time, I just want to highlight three of them because we're going to mention them at some point in the course. To give you an example, one-way, two-way door policy, which essentially consists in identifying when a decision is reversible. I call it like first order decisions. It's a decision that can pretty quickly be reversed if you decide to go back and to kind of like take a different path. And what are the decisions that are irreversible? Once you commit to that, there is essentially no way back. It's too costly to, let's say, go back on your decision. And this is very useful because once you know what kind of decisions are categorized as one-way or two-way, you know, for instance, as an executive, where you should be spending your time and where you should not be spending your time. On another note, the multi-arm bandit, which is the typical trade-off between exploration and exploitation, right? If you essentially have to make a decision, are you going to make a decisions that yield a pretty constant, understood, and known reward for you? Are you going to take a path that you already know pretty well and that's going to generate a pretty steady return for you? Or are you going to take a step in the unknown? Are you going to try a new path that you don't know where it leads and you don't know exactly what is going to be the reward, what is going to be the value that you get from this new path? This is also a traditional framework that's very important for decisions, because if you manage to convince yourself that any new decision is never a mistake because it's a new way to discover value, to discover a new reward, well, you essentially kind of like change your whole mindset of how decisions are made. And we're going to see that a little bit later in the course. I'm not going to spend too much time on SWOT analysis. This is a very business topic that you can find a lot of information on online, and that's going to explain much better than I do. But essentially, SWOT analysis is going to be useful for me because it's going to highlight a little bit the uncertainty that there is behind a lot of the decisions that we make and the attempt to quantify all of this uncertainty. So stick around and let's get into